Councillor Mary Wheel, Chair of the Committee. The event is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and media are welcome. They're watching the meeting remotely, and they're welcome to listen to the discussions taking place, as is everybody else in the room. Before we proceed with the meeting, can I ask the committee to please make sure their mobiles are either on silent or switched off, because we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. I have a questions about the absence from Councillor Lucy Knight, and hopefully,
I have an apology for lateness from Councillor Benton.
right. And I don't know if I can Councillor Thompson, so that's fine. Okay, lovely. So, do any member have an interest to declare? Minutes of the previous meeting, which took place on the 3rd of February, they've been circulated. Does anybody, can I sign them as a correct record of the meeting?
Agree.
Thank you very much. Our next item is the Q3 revenue and public finance monitoring report, which sets out the final financial position for the RBKC for the 24-25 fiscal year. So we've got the lead member of finance, Johnny, lead member of finance and net zero, and head of finance and management, director of business partnering. To present to the committee. Johnny, would you like to do an intro?
Sure. Yeah.
To state before we start that the section references in the printed version are out by one, but the online version is correct.
Lovely, thank you for letting us know. That will avoid much confusion.
Yeah. I won't say too much this time, because really the issues and the opportunities and challenges that I talked about in previous quarters are still there. It's broadly a similar outturn in terms of the drivers of our over and underspends in different departments. £750,000 is still an overspend, and we should still be very cautious about that and take steps to try to reduce overspends in future quarters. But it is, I think, a much better performance than most other London boroughs. So I think we should pay tribute to officers who have worked on the budget over the past few months to try and make sure we are in that slightly better position. Particularly, I think, in adult and children's services, where we're more or less in balance, despite the fact that pretty much every other borough is significantly overspent. I think that was the only thing I probably wanted to highlight, that there are probably questions. The only medium-term challenge that's kind of emerging that I can see is fair funding in the summer, which I guess I would just draw the committee's attention to, and particularly the risk around assumed council tax levels in terms of the grant that we might get in future years. That's less to do with the outcome, but it is to do with the financial context.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall I start with Claire and move around?
Thank you. Yes. I was just thinking, the figures that we have in the second summary, we're talking about a netto expense. And I was just wondering, for instance, in terms of temporary accommodation, do we have somewhere the complete figure that is kind of the gross expense? So not understanding what it's being offset with, do we have that figure relative to its budgeted amount?
I don't have the growth figures at hand. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, positive. Thank you. The other point I just wanted to suggest was at the beginning where it says where the recommendations. I was wondering, is there anything you talk about budgets with your working with, and I wondered whether perhaps maybe not for this meeting, or maybe, but going forward, if there was something particular you wanted our views on that as a committee, that we could have put that in there to draw our attention to anything whether you want feedback on.
I suppose we want feedback on whether you think that we're meeting the commitments we've made in the council plan in kind of the best possible way, how we're managing medium term kind of financial pressures, whether there are things that you think we should invest more in or reduce spend in, differently than presently. And I mean, that's quite broad. If you have ideas about how we should manage the budget pressures that exist better, then there's no monopoly on wisdom. So I'm open to that.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair. It's good news to see some bit more use of the Forestill and Section 106 in this iteration of the outcome paper. I've been worrying away at that for a while, so I'm pleased to see that. And obviously on the capital programme, we've got the itself now appearing within here. I've got two questions. One of them is a question of detail. It's on page 74 of table 12, line 6, where there is an unexplained adverse variance on depreciation in material size, like 1.678 billion. And that doesn't seem to be explained in the notes, and I wonder if perhaps somebody can enlighten us on that. That's my question of detail. And then I'll give you the other one as well, which is clearly TA is that remains the big elephant in the room. And what I'm wondering is how we're getting on with the potential use of the pension fund. Are we able to invest in anything to make a return to make that a right? So those are my two questions.
Okay. Do you want to cover the detailed question?
Yeah, it's on table 12.
Table 16. It's a little on page 74.
Do you mind repeating that?
So page 74, table 16, line 6. The depreciation, there appears to be a material variance, and that's not displayed in here. It's an adverse 1.678 million. What's all that about, please?
Explained it out.
But it's not explained in this one, so it might have been in housing, but it's not here. So I'm interested to know what that's about, please.
Yeah, I'll come back to you with an answer to that one.
Okay, yes, we'll come back and writing through the chair. That would be fine. I'm sure there is an explanation for it, but it's up in the paper, so I'd like to mention. Thank you. So
okay, on the pension fund, work is still underway. I think it would be a very good way of alleviating the temporary accommodation pressure, and it would be an innovative kind of financial model, owing to the very strong performance of the investment committee over a long period. I think when we have kind of a concrete proposal to bring forward, we will obviously share that with the relevant scrutiny, but it's still very much something that we're looking into and seeing if it's possible. I know that councillors Will and Marshall have been talking about it. They may have more detail. My understanding is that it is something that we're exploring because the pressure is, as you say, considerable.
Thank you. On page 31, on the savings 1.20, we talk about what's been achieved. 87.6% that savings have been delivered, but essentially 1.5 million delivered. This this isn't yet subject to your testing challenge, which you've done for the budgeting ahead. Are you able to go back on that 1.57 million and actually do a challenge on it now as to, was it reasonable in the first place? And is it something that's anticipated for the following year? So can we look at that saving and go, it was never achievable, it's just not achievable in a year, or actually it's been a banked saving every year, but the reality is it's never actually achieved. I just wanted to challenge whether we actually go back and look at savings that aren't achieved and query.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't think we have gone through it in the way that you've described. It might be interesting to do so.
And I think Greg's already flagged the temporary accommodation. I mean, to me, I just kind of look at that again and go, it's still always heading in the wrong direction.
Yes, it is.
I mean, I think we just keep asking the same questions. So I don't think I've got a question to really flag.
I mean, the temporary accommodation overspend is over £5 million, and that's after accounting for the additional 1.5 million of homelessness prevention grant. So that effectively takes the gross figure to at least £6.5–7 million. We have put over £5 million into the budget that we've just agreed. Obviously, if we're overspending by 7, that's still a challenge. So,
Thank you. And it comes back to some points we made during the budget working group about overspend. Well,
page 29, 1.10 makes the point that transformation services is key to financial stability. And yet, and then it's spelled out in more detail in section 30 later on in the paper, which are both those are welcome. It's not mentioned in the executive summary, either of the white part of the paper or the yellow pre paper. Would the lead member be prepared to draw transformations to the attention of the leadership team when this paper is presented, I believe, next week? Because I think if it's not mentioned, if it's essential and it's not mentioned in the summary, it's rather also random. It won't catch the eye in a busy meeting.
I'm happy to give that assurance that I'll raise it with the leadership team when the paper's discussed.
Thank you. The next question is, do we know whether the in-year overspends, and there are examples in FCS, temporary accommodation and other things, whether they will be mitigated within the year, or whether they'll become entrenched growth figures in the 25-6 budget? And if we don't know that now, when would be the time for OSC to get feedback on it? Would it be May, June, or thereabouts? I mean, because I think we need to know whether in-year mitigations, which were promised by officers to be mitigated within the year, overspent within the year to be mitigated. If they promise that, we'd like to see whether that actually happens or not.
Yeah. Reviewing whether mitigations take place is something that we can take away and look at with you. I think in terms of whether growth is entrenched, it varies from department to department.
Yeah.
So in some areas, like family and children's services, you might get a quite complex case that arises at quite short notice and can cost tens of thousands of pounds a week. And that can dramatically change a departmental budget. And it's hard to say, I guess, in that example, whether that's entrenched, because there is just going to be and it seems probable, but it's not certain, a larger number of children with those needs coming through the system, or whether they'll simply get to an age where the service is different to them, and they go into adults.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule to that, but departments do put in demographic pressure growth bids most years, and they're relatively consistent. So I think there is account made for the fact that there are kind of structural challenges that necessitate increases in departmental budgets, and those exist in almost all directorates. So there is some provision made for the sort of kind of entrenched in-year overspends that then need to be budgeted for when we start the budget setting process. So that would already be baked into the budget gap figure that you you would see were it to be part of this paper.
Right. Thank you very much. That answer leads me to a final question, which is do we have any valuation in this budgeting and processes constitutes paper of the interrelationship between early interventions and the ensuing cost if we cut back on early interventions on one hand or spend more on that, and what the effect has on later outcomes, particularly when it crosses the divide between FCS and ASC. And are the policies and budgets and actions and outcomes across FCS and ASC, when they're the same person going through life, are actually aligned with each other or not? Is that something we have knowledge of or evidence of that, or is it something we ought to look at more in the future?
I think there is a strong. Do you want to follow this?
Johnny, but I thought there's a couple of service questions here that might help to have me at the table.
Yeah, of course. I was just going to say, I think there is a strong desire for prevention and early intervention to be kind of at the core of policy making, and a recognition that that's really important, both in delivering better outcomes for the people that we serve, but also financially in terms of, you stop something at source, it's less of a problem than were it to sprout and grow wings.
The reason I'm asking that is that, Sarah Newman and her team, for instance, make a big case for spending some money, some part of which is part of the growth side of their budget, which, if we get better outcomes later in ASC, in the round across the two services for the same whole life experience, it is going to be a very good thing to do. If there's no evidence of that, then it's not. And it's crucial that we actually understand that if we're going to do that.
Yeah, so I think that particular one is specifically around the accommodation costs for care leavers moving into adulthood, and that certainly saves us costs on temporary accommodation right off the bat. We both gives better accommodation, better outcomes for those young people moving into adulthood, and also saves that cost. I think the best example of prevention leading to reduced costs is our much lower numbers of looked after children and our systemic practice model, and so that is a sort of ongoing program of work rather than anything new. The transition period, generally as children move into adult social care, many of the children who might have cost the council money through their young lives will not necessarily require adult social care, but I think it's worth us tracking the specific points that you were picking up on.
If I can just add in there, the sort of field of health economics is very well developed, particularly public health economics. So you stop someone smoking, it costs you 50 quid, it saves the health economy £1,000. But I don't think, I don't know, but is it as well developed in the social work field? Because if we are making changes or cutting back on some things, I think Will's point is that we need to be mindful of those costs. And I don't know how well developed that academic discipline is of what the costs are, but maybe we ought to we ought to make ourselves a bit more aware of it when we're talking about things in coming years when things get tighter.
I do think that an organisation such as the King's Fund would be able to shed some light on this.
Yeah, and I think we will. And just one more quick thing. So in adult social care, for example, when we were recently going through the CQC, the fact that no one in adult social care waits more than 28 days for an assessment means that there's that very quick pickup for assessment, and so actually our care package costs are lower than the London average, and I kind of hypothesise that is because of that. They've got into a virtuous circle of assessing people really quickly, meeting their needs, but also doing frequent reviews so that care packages can change and they're not sort of stuck at a certain level. And given that is one of our highest demand areas, that is, it's a challenge.
And I think that's a great financial success, but even more so it's a moral and social success.
Yeah, and better outcomes. And then finally, just on that enormous pressure of temporary accommodation. So our numbers in temporary accommodation have not risen. The cost of temporary accommodation has more than doubled across capital, and I think that there's one borough with an almost 100 million overspend in temporary accommodation. So but nonetheless, we're not remotely satisfied by, you know, this £7 million overspend that's sitting here. And in response to the question of will that translate into growth, it will. So more growth has been built into the TA budget, as you've seen in your scrutiny, and so we probably, you know, when we were sitting here at this time last year, we probably didn't we did put growth in, but we probably didn't anticipate quite the aspiring costs and temporary accommodation that unfortunately we've seen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick questions. The first one's in relation to the General Reserves Fund, the second one's in relation to business rate collections. So on page 91, looking at 31.1, we've got forecast movement of 42 million in reserves, units down to 83 million. That's a third of our reserves seems to have been moved or projected move this year. On that basis, our reserves will run out in 3 years' time. How satisfied are you that the forecast of future years is accurate, given the large movement we're projecting this year?
Yeah, a large part of that movement relates to the collection funds, and that's just a balancing exercise year on year, based on updated government figures. Less than 50% relates to our earmarked usable reserves, and half of that relates to Oracle.
So we're projecting that we won't be having the Oracle implementation costs going on into future years.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. It's supposed to begin in April.
Right.
And then my second question on page 97, just looking at the business collection rates of around 95.4%, they've obviously gone down since last year. Firstly, why? And secondly, will the Oracle system be able to improve some of our collection for either council tax and or business tax, even though they're passed through the central government?
So we use Civica for our business rates collection, so Oracle won't have any impact on that. But the reason this year's figures appear to be lower is because historically we have provided people with a one-off grant payment to support with their council tax, and that has gone straight into the council tax account. So the impact of that was that the collection rate was artificially increased because it was a bigger payment in one go.
So is that council tax or is that business rates or both? I'm asking about business rates.
Sorry, and there was an equivalent government subsidy for business rates as well.
So you say it was artificially
It was because of money we received from the government that we transported immediately into the account rather than waiting for income.
And what's changed?
So this year we're waiting for people to pay their bills as they receive them. So we haven't had the top up we had in previous from government.
But my question is really, why aren't we getting all of the people that we send bills to paying us?
Well, about the gaps.
Yeah. Because if we've outsourced it to Civica, surely Civica should be chasing those people up and pay the council so we get the revenue that we deserve and spend on critical services.
How is it
Unless I've
compared to
understood
other councils?
that. Yeah, unless I've got that wrong.
Good compared to other councils, benchmarking?
From what I know, that the rate is it's a consistent rate and it's fairly high. It's not considered to be low. I don't know the exact comparative figures, but I can get those for you.
You get so
Yeah.
You know, it's
worth watching.
the 0.2% variance isn't massive. I mean, the variance that we're seeing isn't actually huge. I mean, obviously, any income that we hope to generate that we don't receive is a problem. But in statistical terms, this is kind of not. I don't think this is kind of in a place where we would be unduly concerned, particularly given the circumstances that we've heard about in terms of previous government passporting and now waiting for potentially late payers to pay us a bit later. I think a 96% collection rate is fairly good. It could always be better, but we are receiving the large, majority of the income that we should, and I would be surprised if we were kind of dramatically out from other London boroughs in that area.
Thank you. Tracy?
Okay, for me, it's more about just the slippage mentioned in a couple of places and page 75. So what I really wanted was a bit of clarification on slippage. Is it entirely timing? Or does the figure that you mentioned have an impact whenever that project or whatever is completed?
Talking about capital.
Yes, capital spending, exactly. So page 75, if you look at the example is 25.6. And the last sentence says that there is a delayed survey cost of 447,000, mitigating the overspend in the area. And these are plans to carry out the slip budget forward to the spending in the new year. So that 447,000, does that stay static or is it going to change?
So that's the forecast for this financial year. So as at this late stage, we won't be expecting any material changes.
Right, so the slippage entirely refers to timing and not, there's no other impact. So if you were to take that figure, whenever the complete, let's say the next quarter, that would still be 447.
Yes, I mean, at the point at which this report was produced, it was after the end of the quarter, which was December. So we believe these figures to be fairly static. Yeah, we're not expecting any material change to March.
Right, okay, all right, well, I think, and I'm glad Greg asked about depreciation.
Come back in on the depreciation question, if that's okay. And apologies, I knew it was mentioned somewhere in the report, but it's mentioned under performance indicators. So I'll make sure that's updated for the final version of the report. But it's just to do with the downward revaluation of assets. And that's just caused an imbalance between the budget we've had available and the actual charge for depreciation.
Okay, whereabouts was it mentioned? Where did I miss it?
In 33.
Page 33.
There's no point paragraph.
Paragraph 30.3.
33.7.
I had a couple of questions. Just quick. Can someone just, I think I might have asked this before, but the unbudgeted rental costs of £500,000, why were they unbudgeted?
I can explain. Oh, do you want to? Yeah. So just because I've looked into it closely in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it arises entirely. So they were unbudgeted because it's a timing issue about the our consultation on the restorative justice programme. The external scrutiny function that we invited in as part of that programme to look at what we were doing, and residents asked us to spend more time consulting on the restorative justice programme. So what that meant was that the spend of that money didn't kick in until that consultation was completed, and that meant another 3 months running costs of our existing services, which are the dedicated service.
Right. Awesome. Thank you very much. And another question related to, so fundamentally the outturn is great. It's an overspend of only 750,000, but that's a swing of 8 million of overspend, as I'm always saying, and then we got extra income. But that, and I'm sure I should know this, but the extra income is fundamentally from parking, the bulk of it. But can we use that to defray our expenditure, our overspend, or does it have to go into the car parking reserve account? And when I look at the car parking reserve account, that looks as if it shrunk by 6 million, not grown by 6 million. And I couldn't get my head around it, and I'm sure I'm just missing something really obvious. I'd love someone to explain it to me. Please do.
So, yeah, you're quite right that we are limited in what we can keep in the revenue account to the extent which we can apply it to eligible spend in other departments. But we do a lot of work, so every quarter do a granular exercise to look at the amount that we're forecasting as income from parking and the amount that we expect to spend on parking service itself initially, and then any of the services that are eligible for legislation. So at the point at which the Q3 report was prepared, we were confident that we ought to be able to retain all of the forecast income in the year-end accounts offset by other expenditure. If that position was to change at all by the end of the year, we might be in a position where we have to put the balancing figure into the car park reserve. And the reason the car park reserve is reducing is other commitments, which are detailed in one of the other appendix, which is a mixture of capital spend and other revenue.
I suppose just given that we find it's a constant, not struggle, but it's an effort to justify spending parking to basically cross-subsidise other services, to have an extra 5 million to justify, and you've managed to do it, strikes me as very clever.
There's quite a detailed piece of work at the beginning of this financial year when we took another look across the council and passed that legislation, got our legal colleagues to advise us, and we brought into the parking service application some of the costs around waste and recycling, which weren't previously.
Which are big expense, big costs, and so therefore being able to defray a bit of that is significant. Good. Well, that's really great that we've managed to do that. Thank you, because I know that over the years we've tried to be imaginative, but properly, and so it's good that we've been able to accommodate that extra spend. Thank you, Toby. I know you've arrived a little late. Would you like to?
I would. Thank you very much, Chair. Just sort of a general methodology question, which I think I've come up with. I'm wondering about, because I'm looking through the whole thing, and it's not the easiest thing we have. What I'm looking for is other ways of measuring. This ties into a later agenda item. We have essentially ended up spending more money because of essentially what one might call bad procurement practices, right? There are projects which are cancelled, this sort of thing. Is there a way of measuring that? I mean, just where my brain is going is there's sort of a financial case for looking at practices around consultation and procurement, things that end up losing us money because either they get cancelled or somebody ends up subcontracting to somebody else. And so is there a way of directly looking at that in this report, or is that completely outside scope of it?
Are you meaning like capital projects where essentially work is done and then the project isn't progressed?
Yeah, exactly. Either progressed or it just ends up accruing, ends up more has to be done or more has to be spent because either the contractor was not prepared to carry out the work properly or other complications that weren't seen, or, there's a lot of local opposition to it, cancelled, that sort of stuff. Because I always look at those and I think, well, this isn't just a sort of moral case, if you like, it's a financial one. Like, surely we're losing money when we do that. So that's what I'm interested in being able to measure. Is there anything can I find that here?
So I think aborted costs on capital projects is certainly something that we can provide, that's possible to provide information on, and that you can. So I guess the place to look is where you've got a project that you either know hasn't progressed or has become delayed, and then it's kind of, well, what has the expenditure been on that project to date? I mean, a delay almost always entails a cost, even if it's a revenue or a capital project. So the example that Councillor Muir just asked about around the additional costs and the Grenfell services, that change in timescale, which was absolutely the right thing to do, but it did cost £500,000. And on capital projects, you will often get that. But so I think the way to look at it without getting a blizzard of information is to do it kind of by particular projects that you have an interest in.
And then presumably I'll be able to look at the a quarterly, the document like this and be able to match it up to whichever myself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reasonable amount of detail in here about capital programme, and we can, it's possible to provide more detail on specific things of interest. So,
thank you. Okay, well, I think we've probably explored the outcome report to a full technicolor. Thank you very much indeed. And we're going to move on to the strategic procurement update report. And we're welcoming, not to introduce yourself, please, when you sat down. You're head of procurement.
Evening. It was just past 6 months. So new head of strategic procurement for our business.
Welcome to this committee. David Orley, do you want to do an introduction? Okay.
Very briefly, thank you, Chair. So obviously we came to the committee some time ago as the Procurement Act was still being developed by government, and but in place we now obviously past the point at which the Procurement Act has commenced. So it's a good point to come back to now to tell you about all the work we've done to prepare for that. There's a bit of a soft launch in terms of because the old regulations still apply where we use frameworks. So actually we're not having to use the new Act in anger in all procurements, and we're working through departments where new procurements need to follow new procurement regulations. We've done lots of good work, which we'll talk about in terms of preparation for that. And also to really get your steer in terms of future reporting to the committee, in terms of an annual report on procurement impact and performance and compliance, just to get your steer about the kind of things you'd like to see going forward. As I'll hand over to the presenting.
So yeah, I think as David said, we'd like your steer in terms of the future direction. I think we've got a fair view as a team, and I think we need to kind of look at reviewing the council's kind of procurement and contract management strategy going forward. So there's obviously a lot of detail in the report in terms of the things that we're doing, not only in preparation for the regulations, but moving forward, but also the opportunities that the new regulations afford us. So we've done a lot of updates to the council's constitutional contract regulations and also the procurement code, which should hopefully give us that additional flexibility to reserve contracts and spend for local suppliers. So we are looking at, as the K&C Oracle system comes in, that will give us the ability to measure that as well, measure local spend and also spend with SMEs, which is an expectation of the Act. And I think the other big area we're looking at is contract management. So I think when we were writing this report, we were kind of in the midst of starting to get together a corporate contract register. So obviously we need that baseline data to then look at future opportunities. So as of today, we've got 255 million spend captured within that contract register across some 390 contracts. And we're working closely with colleagues in DD&T to put that into and develop an app. And again, the K&C Oracle will afford us that opportunity to track spend against contracts in the future. You can build what's called contracts partnership agreements within the system that will then help you on a kind of quarterly or 6 monthly basis track spend against some of those key corporate contracts, which is why we're also looking at investing and having a role within a team structure that will have that contract management focus. And it's aligned with the regs because the changes in the regulations have moved from market engagement or tendering process to contract life. Hence, obviously, the change, but also it gives us, that's where the opportunities tend to be in terms of efficiencies, improvements to services, and also including the improvements and the delivery of the recommendations following the Grenfell inquiry.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report, which was approved beautifully after I asked for it to be approved. And thank you very much for doing that. Peter, do you want to start it?
Sure.
Not everybody has to ask a question.
Well, it's early days, so I mean, we need more clarification than anything else. On page 155, 5.6, it was interesting to read, the amount of savings you had of revising the contract management of soft facilities. These contracts, how long term are they? How will be the reviews?
Yeah, so I think that contract from memory is around 5 years, so it's got extension options within it. So again, yeah, I mean, I suppose when you go into the market, it's making sure that there's enough period of time in there to be attractive as a contracting opportunity, but also those opportunities at negotiation stage, so the extension stage. So at the moment we're saying there'll be a 4-year impact of 800k saving through the contracts, but that's not to then say, as we obviously evolve over the next few years, that there might not be additional efficiencies. Part of when you look at the asset review and the offices, the council offices, Pembroke Road and other properties, there may be an opportunity then to kind of review and renegotiate the contracts over a period of time as well.
Right. Okay. And then you do midterm. There's no.
At various points. I mean, the print contracts is another good example where we want to look at the new contract to change behaviours. So using the reliance on print, particularly, so having less machines in the town hall, so encouraging more use of electronic documents, more use of the print room facility to reduce costs. So reviewing that contract with contract managers regularly through the period of contract, something we're keen to make sure is happening, and the contractor to make sure they're delivering what we need, but we're also working on ways we can contract more efficient and lower cost.
Okay, thank you.
Sydney.
Just two quick questions. Page 136, the first bullet on 512. We're talking about capital appointments being safe, and we're looking to strengthen the existing ban on contractors. The second sentence says, ban on the use of any combustible materials in external walls. I had a question about why we're not banning combustible materials full stop, rather than just on external walls. Clearly, if you have combustible material on the internal wall, it will still be combustible. So why do you restrict that to only external?
So I don't think it's meant to be explicitly restricted to external walls only. So we're looking at making sure there are safe products in place across the whole of any construction project. We're building into the contract documentation, invitations to tender, clauses that allow for us to make sure that deleterious materials, so unsafe materials, aren't being used. So that's just a headline there, unfortunately, that perhaps suggests that we're not including the materials within.
Influstrious phraseology.
Yes, yeah,
we make policy to use
Indeed,
combustible
But
material.
we're definitely applying the policy in practice is to make sure we're using safe materials throughout construction projects that have been.
That would probably be better phrased.
Yes,
that implies that it's just external walls and not internal. And my second question is around the procurement contract register 529 on page 141. It specifically mentions third line up from the bottom in brackets, list of procurements contracts £2 million plus. Just explain to me, presumably when we've got the Oracle system in place, and in order to be more efficient as a council, you don't want adults doing one contract with one supplier and then children and family services doing another contract with the same supplier, irrespective of size. So presumably, and just to understand this £2 million plus, will we have a system where any contract with any supplier is going to be on a database so that any part of the council can see who that contract is, so that we can go through that? Because then, if that's the case, what is the relevance of the £2 million plus figure?
The 2 million plus is part of the new regulations. So it's part of the regulatory requirement. So in April, we'll be coming to members with the initial report around the actual pipeline of procurements. What we need to do by mid-May every financial year will be to report any procurements in the forward-looking 18-month period that have got a value of 2 million and above. So it's part of kind of transparency, or furthering a transparency, to be able to help the market, and particularly SMEs. So they'll all be published on the government central digital platform by every contracting authority. They will basically provide a list of those higher value contracts. I mean, we'll be doing that as part of the pipeline plan and the regulatory requirements, but we'll be going a step further. So with the contract register that we'll have, we'll actually be providing the market with a 2-year procurement plan of everything we intend to go out with. Because you tend to find SMEs and small, especially smaller companies, may not necessarily
Small
be
and
looking.
medium-sized, we mustn't speak about
Yes.
small and medium-sized enterprises.
They naturally won't always be looking at contracts of that kind of value. So although that's what the regulations and government have intended to do, we want to kind of also publish the smaller value options.
So we intend to go further. Actually, we're working closely with Westminster colleagues. Obviously, lots of procurement done for by-borough services. So we're intending that pipeline to actually include contracts of 100,000 and above, rather than the 2 million above. So members will have that transparency and visibility, as will residents, as will potential suppliers, bids for contracts.
And then just so I actually understand, so that allows us what I call the external suppliers of us to see what contract pipeline looks like. What I was really asking is, will we be able to control on an internal Oracle database who, so that all of the different parts of the company know that we've got a master contract with a supplier? They can all use the master contract, because some councils, you get multiple departments having 6 contracts with the same organisation. The right arm doesn't know what the left arm is doing. So I want some assurance that the procurement system that we're putting in place will prevent that from happening for any size contract, not just the.
It will. I mean, we highlighted in the report that we're already using the data we've gathered, the leads team have gathered, to look at opportunities for aggregating spend together into one contract. So we very much will have the power and the tools.
It won't be on Oracle, will it?
Well, some of it will be from the Oracle spend data. So that's something, again, will be better than where we are currently with the current system. So we'll be able to connect the.
But the
horizontal
contract
spend
data is going to be on a separate.
Yes,
system.
we'll be able to link the two together. So we'll have the drawing that information together to see where those opportunities for aggregation for reducing the number of contracts are, which we've not had before.
So you're right, the contract register will kind of, that's already highlighted, you know, we've got 4 or 5 contracts with Civica. We've got a number of contracts with other suppliers across multiple departments. And then we've also got contracts of a similar nature with different suppliers where we want to go in and start to interrogate. You know, we've just let under the soft FM contract a security contract, but there are other security firms that have come up in the spend data that I've been analysing. So Canopy Oracle will allow us to continue that refresh and analysis of the spend data, but the register that we're building and have already got, well, it's in a spreadsheet format at the moment, allows us to do that kind of analysis.
So, for example, as you just mentioned, Civica, as we've got 5 contracts with Civica, if another department wants to do a contract with Civica, will they go to Civica direct, or will they come to the procurement team to say, can we just expend?
So again, we're talking to colleagues in the different departments to make sure we have those conversations before re-procurement is to happen, so we can actually join the procurement stuff, and that's a very good example where we're doing that currently now, because those contracts are over the next couple of years where they need to be re-procured.
And also to look at some joint contract management, so rather than 5 separate contract managers meeting with Civica, is obviously, you know, them looking to kind of meet with the supplier as a collective.
So I think we've identified something, one of the things we'd like reported on, which is opportunities taken to consolidate contracts through having dual option.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay. Observation is what you've been saying, that Oracle seems to be able to enable you to do what might be considered traditional critical path analysis on projects as well. Comparing, as you said, the budget spend, how it's broken down through achievement milestones, and then the actual as it goes, then the evaluations of whether it needs to be up to certain critical factors or up to enable time and cost of completion to be managed better. That seemed to come out of what they're saying. But the question I wanted to ask there was more around, will this new procurement arrangement ensure that contracts from whatever department are in line with council plan action plan and policy commitments? And do we have within our metrics the right KPIs to ensure that we're verifying that and also we're getting value for it?
Yes, I mean, one thing I've been really impressed with since coming here is the governance. I mean, a number of people that come to governance say, you know, there's a lot for them to do, but I mean, it's right that we've got that kind of visibility. So through the commercial assurance panel, which myself and David like chair, and obviously we've got legal, finance and other colleagues there as well. The procurement strategy reports that come, obviously will use anything with 100k or above spend or value. So again, there's that interrogation there about how it contributes to the council plan and the council aspirations.
Yeah. And the other thing is I just wanted to, it's a repeated question I asked earlier, and Maxine answered it, is the follow through for early interventions, which often happen in or don't happen in amateur services through the transition to adult social care, and the consequences in terms of high value, high needs contracts later for care and such like. And whether actually we do look at those two departments and work together, and whether they're aligned, what their actions and policies are aligned within the overall policy of council. Just letting the right contracts in both of those depends on an overview of the two together rather than an overview of just the silo of each one.
Yeah.
That's probably a question for adult social care and social services, whether they're joining together properly when they're doing the procurement, because the procurement function can only do what.
Well, I mean, I think that the question I'm asking is that when you evaluate a contract procurement in, for example, FCS, do you look at the consequences of what is done purely in the context of FCS, or do you take into consideration the consequences of that procurement with regard to the outturns of ASC as well?
Yeah, I think my experience, I believe I've joined the Adults and Children's Library Procurement Boards that meets regularly to discuss the forthcoming procurement. And I think there's a lot of that thinking and conversation discussion going on.
Yeah.
They have shared, so Westminster lead on the business partnering for procurement for library services. So they've got a shared business partner. So I think that really helps in terms of that crossover as well. So the way in which they're organised and supported from a procurement perspective at Westminster really helps that. But I think we've been there to contribute to help to make sure that things are happening.
Having not only a policy and a follow through that you guys do, but evidence that we can scrutinise or add in.
I think it's the chair says that's probably a question for adults and children to come back to. Okay.
Yep.
Joanna. Thank you, and I hope you're settling in well to the new job. I wanted to talk about project management. I come from a legal background, and I worked for public consultants, and it got to the stage where actually the lawyers, there was a team of contract managers that were as big as the lawyers, because essentially, if a contract goes wrong in the first 6 months, you can't get it back on track. Are we envisaging that level of contract management, as in the enforceability of the contract, the delivery of the contract? Because the contract management that you set out in 517, for me, I looked at it and I went, well, the fundamental one is the delivery of the service. And for me, it really wasn't covered particularly well in the bullet points. But I want to know, what are you envisaging as contract manager, as opposed to sitting down and saying, are we on track, are we on track? Are we looking at specific clauses and going, this isn't being delivered, this isn't being delivered on time, therefore there's a cost implication, therefore we can't deliver our side? Are we looking at that level of granularity, or are we looking at high?
I mean, I think it's something that's going to have to grow. I mean, my background was contract management before procurement, so I was kind of supporting people, lead commissioner for a number of years. So I think, the key thing we need to do first is make sure we've got people educated and trained to deliver contract management to a high level. We've seen there's some really good examples of, really comprehensive contract management going on across the organisation. But I'm sure as we start to evolve, there'll be kind of pockets that the farm are going to need to do a lot of support, which is why I'm really keen to bring a role into the team to have that kind of corporate oversight and also take responsibility for training and educating. I'd also once we've got all of our procurement buyers in the team, the system I had where I worked before, especially on the really big, most strategic contracts, is have them not only do the procurement, but afterwards sit alongside the contract managers, so go to the quarterly meetings, so they really understand, both the service area and my team understand the real contract in depth. And as you say, the KPIs, because the benefit is when it then comes back around with procurement, you've got not only the service area, but the procurement team that has knowledge of what works well, what didn't work well, what needs improving upon, researching the market and understanding through the London procurement network what innovation is out there and what things are happening that are differently. So it'll be very case by case. I mean, we'll obviously have to kind of prioritise. So I think we'd probably top slice it. So let's start with our most strategic, say platinum and gold contracts, and then obviously make sure we work our way down and work closely with colleagues in Westminster who've already kind of, have rolled this out a number of months ago. So we're working closely with their team to kind of learn some of the journey they've been on and where best to invest time.
And if I can I add to that? I mean, presumably after a big contract's let, you can, the standard practice would be to compile the contracts obligations list, for example, that is the kind of Bible of the contract manager within the department. So it'd be comforting to know that some of those procedures, like a obligations tracker and list of KPIs and all the rest of it, is standardised, and that people understand how to use an obligation tracker, for example.
And those sort of things we put into contract management frameworks. We've got a contract management network that is established, the framework with their remits for the contract managers to follow, contract management challenge sessions we're running.
It's also about our obligations to the supplier as well, that we need to keep them on the right side of. But anyway, sorry to delay us.
No, very helpful. That then leads me on to the second question, which is about varying of contracts. To what extent the frequency and is it, do you expect that people will come in and have underbid and deliberately sort of supplied, but actually move you from the Mini that you procured into sort of a Volvo and then a Rolls Royce by virtue of this, that actually as a result of the contract that we start with isn't the contract or indeed the spend that we land up with by virtue of this variation of contracts as we go along?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I think this is where the contract register, but also the extra control having within Cancy Oracle will be key. Because once you set up obviously a value of a contract, most variations tend to involve obviously kind of monetary changes as well as some of the nature of what the service is delivering. So that will give us that oversight where we can start to see if contracts are exceeding the value that they were procured at. And part of the training will be around, one of the expectations would be that within contract managers will be maintaining contract variation logs, that the paperwork would therefore be shared with our service as well, so we can keep that on record. And obviously most of our contracts here are sealed. So again, if you do a variation, those kind of contracts should be re-signed and resealed with the help of legal services. So that is something we're keen to kind of like make sure we've, our team have got a repository of everything that's going on. But the training we've been on today with Cancy Oracle is a real step forward, being able to kind of track exactly what's going on, because some variations aren't always done in writing. And then what you find is the value's grown, but there's nothing actually written down, but the system will help flag that. And I was telling you,
Not going to happen anymore.
That as well, there's lots of good internal governance and challenge around variations with ourselves, with legal and colleagues, to make sure, obviously, if a variation in itself constitutes an exec decision or a key decision, then we go through that process, we put that through that process. There's transparency of challenge there as to why that variation is necessary. Why was it something we procured that is now resulting in much higher cost or a different way of delivery that we didn't anticipate? So lots of robust challenge that's happening already to make sure those are limited circumstances where that occurs.
Just ask one last question. Your Appendix A on page 145, which is your team. When I was looking at the vacancies, you seem to be missing quite a lot of the third row down.
Yeah.
As I read it, it was about 4 of those 5 officers were missing. Have we got any updates or got any good news?
Yeah, well, I mean, I interviewed today, so we've got someone that's, she doesn't know yet, but is appointable, because we've got the other 4 people to interview on Monday and Tuesday. So the 2 commercial specialist roles, we're quite confident that we should have at least 2 people to slot into those, or at least offer. The contract management lead is something that I'm now working on the JD to go out with that. And the officer, I'm meeting with Daniel Ambrose in HR on Fridays, because we're going to need to go external. We've tried internally recruiting, but the 2 procurement officers couldn't oversee in the interim the ERP work, because they've both been on the training this week along with me and the rest of the team. So it is a slow build up, but we're keen to kind of make sure we get the right people in post. But I think, considering we've not had those 2 additional commercial specialists before, I think once we do, and again, we're through the interview processes, making sure they've got a strong contract management experience background as well.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, on a similar theme, and I think this is more about the officers or the existing officers in other teams. Last time we were here, I asked how confident as the council we have sufficiently qualified and experienced officers to manage this system, and we appear to have quite a good story to tell on page 152. The figures of shows who trained who are being trained. There's only have to be a work in progress, but I mean, how's that going? I'll say a bit more about that and how you'll maintain a steady state across the council so we can deliver this service effectively.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the training around the readiness for the public procurement regulations going on, I mean, our whole team have completed the training, and the seniors and myself have all completed the 3-day deep dive. I mean, if anything, what it did highlight, because it was mainly central government officers on there, is they looked to us for the answers most of the time, which was interesting, especially colleagues in defence, which is a bit concerning. But I think often their roles are quite kind of narrow, so they will only manage a part of the process. I think in local government we used to kind of broaden across that contract management and procurement sphere. The benefit of the kind of lunch and learns, I suppose what we've been doing through the lunch and learns over the kind of first 6 months I've been here, and Natalia and now kind of done a sterling job before I joined, was rolling out module by module. So anyone that hasn't gone and completed that training, we've had probably I think 80 or 90 officers internally that have gone to those lunch and learns where we've been able to impart the knowledge on them. So that those recordings are all available for officers as well. That was a useful refresh and to try and put it into perspective about well, how does it apply for you in your role at RBKC? Obviously, the training by central government was very broad because it has to kind of meet everyone's requirements. So the kind of lunch and learns that we described in the paper was to kind of further that knowledge and a chance for people to kind of ask questions. The next phase is we're now kind of going in. I've already run one session with colleagues in social investment and property, and we've got another 2 sessions booked in. Again, that's about procurement in their area, but also the changes to contract regulations that we've already kind of concluded in February. So we're going in and now doing work with actual executive director areas as you know, in a kind of a prioritised approach.
Right, thanks for good stories to tell, and I won't comment on my previous employment.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about 5.13 on page 107, which is again products and suppliers. And I was wondering, do you foresee any risk around that? And is that able to be mitigated?
Oh, 5.3, sorry, around the
5.13.
oh.
Policy and products combustible.
So we've already had a challenge, haven't we, on Grenfell
Right, yeah, so we have two, so one product supplier and one employer's agent who have issued proceedings for judicial review against the council's decision to ban them as a result of the findings of the Grenfell inquiry report. We are working with legal to robustly defend those judicial review applications. There are only applications at this stage that haven't been given permission to proceed yet.
Because potentially that could become expensive. And I guess what I'm wondering is, do we foresee any others? And are we able to find a way to strengthen this to prevent any further challenge?
That's a really good question. So I know we're working closely with external counsel on these 2 particular challenges now. And I think, again, we believe we have good, strong grounds for defence in both cases. But we've also got to learn from that in terms of how and whether we can refine policy going forward. We're also conscious that government has instigated investigations to 7 of the companies involved in the Grenfell Tower refurbishment. So that will, again, add weight to what we've done as an authority to do what we're doing. Hopefully government will then take action through those investigations as well to help the whole local government and the public sector. And that's our hope.
Excellent. Excellent, thanks. And then I wanted on page 140, 5.27 about the direct awards. And I see that these have been increased following the lunch and learns. And I'm wondering, do we feel generally that direct awards are a good thing, A? And B, is there anywhere a list or anywhere to access what those 29 direct awards were for?
We can certainly provide a list, that's not a problem. I think what we're finding is with everything when you start to really push on compliance in any area, you get a bit of a hump to start with, where things that you wouldn't have been aware of before come out of the woodwork. I think we've experienced that. I think there are circumstances where direct awards are legitimate, and there are instances where, for example, when government gives funding for services year on year, and the funding only comes through towards the end of the year, you're relying on a third party to provide that service. That usually results in a direct award because you haven't got time to procure. There are circumstances where there is only one supplier of a product or a service, and where you have to go down that route. There are some instances where grant is given by GLA, where they're saying you will use that contract, that supplier, that service, but they should be fairly limited. And what we want to do is make sure there's good planning through the contract register, the procurement pipeline, to make sure we have less and less of these situations where direct award is needed. Often because of poor planning, in reality. Because not thinking ahead in terms of when the contract is to be procured.
Yeah, and it isn't clear what sort of value we're talking about these 29 awards.
No, that's right. I think that's.
So it's difficult to sort of weigh up how significant that is.
I think moving forward, I mean, we have got some of that data within the table we'll be able to share. But I think you're right. That's something moving forward. The intention is that I'd probably look to kind of go to executive directorate management team meetings a couple of times a year and report. And this would be one of the things we report
I'm going to
on.
suggest, Claire, that it's included. I've got a little list of things that I'm going to suggest a part of our report, and that will be on it.
Yeah, and we would include the value, because you're right. I mean, you can have 40, directables or waivers one year totaling $1 million, and then the following year 4 or 5, but actually, with a value of 6 or 7 million, which haven't been market tested, probably because of the nature of the request, and so they bring with it different risks. I mean, I would say I wouldn't be surprised as we go into 2025 and measure the data, the numbers are probably going to come down, because I've challenged on quite a few occasions where actually they're not directables or waivers. When you get under the detail, they're wanting to actually modify an existing contract, and it's within the realms of the regulations to do what it is they're wanting to. So there'll be a bit of education there as well with some of the services. But yeah, we can certainly start to get the data a bit more robust.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Toby, have you got a question on? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I had a call. You talked in the report about what you've done, what you're doing about compliance and moving towards that. And I just wanted to sound you out to see how confident we feel generally that we are in a state of readiness for compliance.
It's Grace. Compliance, Grace.
Yeah.
I think we have very much raised awareness.
Yeah.
We have very much buy-in from the executive management team, the executive directors. We have really good, robust internal governance on the commercial assurance panel. The team that leads building up, I think, is helping us to do that. And I think with what we talked about the audit committee the other night, actually how we look at things like continuous auditors and how we can get assurance on these things on a more regular and short, sharp basis. I think is all building a picture where I'm comfortable and confident we're getting it right. We're getting in the right place. So it's reassuring.
I think the introduction of the Gateway 3 reports, where we don't just say, we want to go to the market, we want a contract award, but bringing the individual, the contract management team back to then say 6 months in, how things progressing, how's the contract performing, how's the contract management, how is it that you're performing management, to try and build a picture of good practice, make sure we share that and challenge as well. And I think that will obviously help with that kind of transition moving forwards.
I think the other thing I'd add is about half the contracts we procure are in housing management, and we have very good working relationship with the housing management colleagues. They've got their own capital procurement team. They have a very robust procurement plan, which they work to, they monitor, we work with them to monitor. They've set up these project union frameworks, which are working really well to do mini competition for contracts that they need to put in place, which helps to speed up some of the process but still gets value for money. So there's lots of good work actually in housing management, which I want to reflect actually it's been done really well. They really got the compliance thing as well as the impact that procurement can have for residents in terms of safety, in terms of improving their livelihoods and their properties. So it's been a really good story over the last 12, 18 months.
Yeah, and all of theirs already built in the contract register. Myself and Stuart and the team, we've sat down and everything's in there.
Excellent, thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you. Yeah. A little bit from what I was speaking about before, also acknowledging what Councillor Gardner brought about, 6 months being when you're going to know if something's going to work or not, which, I don't know, obviously, it's like yourself, Lee, have managed 6 months, so we're probably confident. But the question I have is really more about, I guess you just touched on the housing management procurement team. I see a lot of kind of what look like catastrophes to me in terms of procurement, more around, I'm a council tenant, and so much of it leads to that. So, we had just outside my door was Hazelwood, and under scaffolding for 3 months, it went up and down completely unnecessarily, it seemed like. And then recently we had the bathrooms. I'm thinking about a slightly longer rollout, or staggered rollout. I can just tell you, it is anecdotal, but I can tell you 100% confidence that United Living did not have the capacity to fulfill their contract. They just don't. It took them almost 4 weeks to do a little student note, and that was quite common around the estate, and they were incapable of communicating, blah blah blah. So really, it's about like if I think that should have been caught very early on, and my feeling is there should be some kind of trigger mechanism to to almost like a probationary period for things like that when there's a long rollout. Because I mean, there is nothing. I assume there's nothing to do now. Well, yeah.
So you're talking about some robust contract management and stopping something in its tracks that is clearly not
So
right.
again, I mean, there are triggers. So the contract itself is obviously the document that we'd be holding a contractor to account. So I mean, I can report that actually Doug Goldring, the Director of Housing Management, holds regular internal governance boards looking at the performance of these key contracts and challenging and go back to challenge contractors where the work's being delayed, the work's not being up to quality. I appreciate and I hear there's still lots to be done, lots to improve. But I can see that the rigour with which that is being applied and people are being officers, contract managers, project managers being held to account in the organisation has improved a lot. And it's something I think it will take some time to see coming through completely, but I can see where there's been challenge around some the contractors you named actually in terms of making sure we get their senior management engaged in terms of where they need to improve their performance or we deal with it through the contract.
Sure. I think the benefit with the project union frameworks like David's alluding to that have been set up is obviously you have multiple suppliers on each of the lots. So you've got a quick mechanism there where if one supplier isn't performing, they know that obviously there's others there that can kind of pick the work up. So I think the work they've done to get all of those in place and are really comprehensive just gives that kind of fallback rather than just being a single supplier contract for everything. Where if it fails, you've then got to go back out to the market, which obviously isn't always quick.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Thank you. Can I ask about the contract register? So we had Atomis to start with, and we were progressing towards having a complete contract register. Now, reading this, it's like we're starting from scratch.
For the e-tendering solution, we were going down the Atomis route with Westminster, and we both decided ultimately, as we were doing implementation, it wasn't meant to work for either authority. Westminster decided to go one route in terms of capital sourcing, which is the version of what we had here. We've chosen down the Delta route. So the Delta are one of the major players working with government to make sure that it's compliant with the new Procurement Act. So we're satisfied that they've built a solution for e-tendering that does the job. In the market, unfortunately, suppliers offer a contract management module as well, but it's very rare that actually it works well. It's the correlation of the products. So that's where we're looking at other ways in which we can do this. Which is
but we haven't lost the information that we have.
No. So again,
it sounded as if you were starting from
No,
scratch. But much of the data is already.
So all the data that we have in the current system is being migrated. So I know Council has asked this previously. So we are in the process of migrating all of the data from the current system into the new system. So
we don't have to start again. I suppose my other observation is that this is quite an expensive team. We're a new function. Obviously, part of its function is to keep us on the straight and narrow, make sure we're compliant with quite complicated legislation and fair and equitable with suppliers. But fundamentally, we're also hoping that it's going to save us money in the long run by managing our contract. So I think it is very important that this committee reviews its activities, given that significant spend. So I was just going to suggest a few things from our conversation, putting together our conversation. So I think aggregation, opportunities that we've taken to aggregate things, variations to contracts and the terms you described, number and value. Sanctions we've taken, we've met against companies for poor KPI performance. KPIs in general, how much, and who's keeping to their KPIs and who isn't. Lateness procuring, departments who haven't actually worked out that they've got a contract that needs. I mean, that should disappear eventually, but it does happen all the time. I mean, to my knowledge, it happens all the time. Direct awards, challenges that we've received from suppliers to our approach, which reflects that, but there will also be challenges on a less sensitive thing. And I think it would also be helpful to have a bit of narrative. One thing we haven't discussed is the importance of specifications for contract and being a good informed customer. So it'd be useful to have a bit of narrative around our success or our whatever in specifying a contract correctly before we go out to tender. and because that will obviously be reflected in the performance later. So I think those are a few things, unless anybody's got, we can always message you afterwards or email afterwards with any other ideas. Joanna?
I just wondered about the local market, the local economy.
How successful we are with that. Excellent. Yes,
Yeah.
that's lovely.
And that will be one of our kind of default like reports and things. We'll start to report on how much money is spent. You know, in KNC or often we'll have data on RBKC based suppliers, West London based, and then other. So we'll be able to report on both those, and also small medium enterprises, how much of our spend is with that market as well.
Just to clarify, if I'm understood it correctly, the reply to part of my question, which was about how children and adults work together, the answer was that was something that needed to be looked at by children and adults. But it strikes me that it needs an overview of how those two work together from your expertise.
And we can help support officers with that, I think.
Yeah, and that actually is part of the specification issue more than anything else, because it's at the beginning of the contract. Is it going to produce the right outcomes for both departments?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we probably don't need to delay you any longer. Thank you very much, and welcome. And we're really looking forward to some good work from you, and some savings and some quality services. So thank you. But you get to the script. It's great to Jamie.
No, I'm saying.
That's okay. Holly,
That's okay.
just we now get attention to insurance services, which in their enthusiasm didn't get quite so cut down as the procurement paper, but it's a little bit of cut down. But this is a very important subject, and how we cover ourselves. Hey, do you want to introduce?
Yes, thank you. If it will help the committee, just as a sort of an overview, the report is set out in two principal sections: the actual insurance covers that we purchase and some background as to the premiums that we paid over the years and the performance of that. And then the claims management performance and the processes, along with a number of appendices to hopefully support that content and provide you with assurance. It's probably also correct just to highlight that we are a shared service over three councils, Westminster and Fulham. RBKC is the host borough, and similar monthly reporting arrangements and processes are applied equally to those councils, just for your sort of parental assurance that it's a very similar process. One thing that's difficult to capture in the report, and hopefully I will give a good example here, is that in relation to the claims management, it may be useful to highlight that there are a number of natural checks and balances in the system. So when we do the monthly reporting, real data is supplied to the 151 officers, people like David and such like, so they can actually see what's being generated by our claims system. But equally, there is no advantage from the team's perspective in trying to, should we say, under-reserve claims and gain performance. Because the way the KPIs are measured, if we were to set a reserve on a claim too low, when it's ultimately settled, it comes in at an amount that's above what's reserved on the system, which produces a negative against one of the other KPIs, which is to monitor our performance against historic reserves. And I just think it's worth highlighting there are a number of those sort of balances in there that hopefully make sure that we're reserving things correctly. I should also say that equally, it's a balance for a service such as ours. Occasionally, I like to remind people that our clients are the 99.9% of other people that aren't currently involved in a claim against the client, against the council. So we obviously have a responsibility to look after the council's money in that, but equally we need to demonstrate that we've got a fair and just process when we're considering claims. And that's why you'll see reference to the detailed procedures, and that all of our decisions are underpinned by the principles of English law. But again, in terms of natural checks and balances, if Sarah and her team, and I will introduce Sarah in a second, decide to repudiate all claims, then we'll have a reserve on the system which is low. When those people take us to court and we lose, that will cost us a lot of money, and then that will produce negative in the financial figures. That's probably, hopefully enough.
Thank you, Ray. Could you actually introduce
Yes,
yourself as
indeed.
well as Sarah? Because I was very
Yes.
prepared to do so. So the pair of you.
I'm joined by my colleague Sarah Chapman, who's the Assistant Head of Service and looks after the liability claims team. My name's Ray Chissy and I'm head of the Tri-Borough Insurance Service.
Thank you. Right, who would like to kick off with that? Pretty, do you like to start?
Yes.
I'll move around that way.
Sure. What I would like to know is, so on page 160, your deductibles, which are almost sort of, 10 times the increase. And okay, you've mentioned the claims and it's would you just quantify that a bit more? And if there were to be claims, how often would they be reviewed?
Sure, which of the particular you're referring to?
There's one
2.1
increase in
million?
deductibles.
The increase in deductibles.
What would make us change our mind and decide that was too high?
Well, one of the advantages that we have given the depth of our data is when we go out to procure, I can literally say to anybody that wants to bid that they could bid whatever combination that they wanted, and we can do an analysis afterwards to decide if it's, we think, advantageous for us to operate at that level. I should say that it includes the property, which is a very significant increase from where we've been previously. All of the analysis suggests that in the long run, that £1 million deductible will result in less spend than if we'd have taken the price they offered us for, let's say, a £250,000 deductible. And via the claims data, in fact, Sarah was able to do that and supply some of that information when that report went through governance, so people could see the calculations that we've done and why that was best choice. I'm a cautious person, and that's always a case of all things being equal. Yes, there's always a case, and so far that hasn't happened. But whenever you change the deductible in the first year, you fear the worst, that there are bad storms and such like. But that hasn't happened.
Thank you. Thank you.
And no questions.
Will?
I wanted to ask in general terms whether Grenfell and COVID and the economic upheaval after this as well actually changed the appetite we have for profiling of our risks.
Some question? Right.
Yes, so I unfortunately don't want to really comment about sort of Grenfell in particular. What's out there is available in the public domain. But in terms of the marketplace as a whole, it has had a huge impact upon certain areas of insurance cover. Contractors find it very difficult to get professional indemnity insurance for certain services. Housing surveyors have a lot of trouble getting those kind of insurances. It's clearly something that has made the market much more cautious. At our last procurement, our property spreadsheet had 40 columns of requested information in order for an underwriter to consider each property. And this is the kind of caution that's been built into the marketplace. And it is something that I think will increasingly become a problem. I would begin to suspect that insurance companies don't have the risk very well.
Thank you. John?
I would like to go back a bit to the deductible and the fact that I believe I read somewhere here that there was only one company that bid for that. Are you therefore not a hostage to fortune with any one bidder? And why, given this is less across the three councils, why was there no more interest?
I think the reference to one bidder on property was in respect of leasehold insurance, which is a definite ongoing problem and something I regularly attend the leasehold forum and discuss with those leaseholders there. We got two bids on the property insurance for Kensington with quite a significant difference between the two bids. It is an issue. We are looking at a number of options to see if we can't improve the position, although inevitably with the leasehold situation, I'm already hearing about other people that are returning to the marketplace, and it always takes time, but these are commercial markets. And if somebody remains in the market and is perceived as doing very financially well, suddenly more competition grows, which is not a lot of consolation to leaseholders that are paying increased premiums. But there are a number of other sort of initiatives that are being looked at in the long term. But this is probably not the place to sort of talk about them at the moment. You've not been briefed on them, and they're very much in the feasibility stage.
Typically local governments, we don't see many of the high street names bidding for local government contracts for insurance. They say a lot of it speaks down to the public procurement rules, for example, how it's there to do. So actually, the market is quite limited for different types of cover local government has to get. We know last time round that actually on the leasehold side, particularly some authorities were struggling to get cover at all. That's how it's like the market.
We only take cover on a yearly basis. Is this or do we take it for a couple of years? Are we forever painting the fourth bridge by the time you've done one procurement before you have to the next?
It probably does feel like that from my perspective. I mean, insurance is a special form of contract recognised in law. So whilst we procure for 5 years in an OG process, unlike probably almost every other service, we don't end up with a contract, we end up with an insurance policy. That insurance policy is renewed annually. Insurers will say, yes, we will agree to do the insurances for 5 years under a long-term agreement. And it's a very one-sided arrangement, but providing they don't break the rates, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult for us to not renew with them. There are clauses that can be activated, but you've got to do a lot of long-term planning to do that. But insurance companies frequently break those long-term agreements, just the extra percent here or there, because they become confident that if indexation is 3% at the moment, and they come back and say, we don't like the way this looks, it's going to be a 4% increase, 1% above indexation, we're probably not going to think it's financially viable to go out and procure those insurances, especially if they begin to suspect that they won the last tender by a margin. And it is why we need more competition. As David has alluded to, the insurance brokers give us access to certain Lloyd's markets, but those insurance brokers have to front those bids. Lloyd's per se will not deal with us direct. And with the exception of Zurich Municipal, none of the insurance companies will contract with us unless a broker is in the middle.
Sorry, I don't think I'm really clear.
Sure.
Do we do annuals or do we do years or?
No, that's probably a fair point. So every year we have to go through a negotiation process. Probably unlike many other contracts, the amount of properties we own grows, the information changes, service dynamics alter, new risks come up. But generally speaking, we're trying to get the insurers to hold the existing rating. But say from Lee's procurement team perspective, if Kensington increases its housing stock by 10%, the premium's going to go up by at least 10%.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks very much. I was struck on page 172 by an apparent increase, a very significant increase in the number of motor claims. What's going on there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You'll see later on there's a bit of benchmarking that we've started to get up and running. And well, in fact, Sarah may be closer to some of the discussions that she's had with her colleague that looks after those. If Sarah wants to take that, if she doesn't, I'll
Go on,
answer.
Sarah.
Yes.
Yes.
So we love to hear your voice.
So I think partly it's now we're looking at an increase after COVID, more people back on the roads. I think that has had an impact.
Literally,
yes, no pun intended. And partly there has been an increase. We have noticed this and have already started to work more closely with the departments that use our motor vehicles, etc., across the council. That being said, we're not the only council that's seeing an increase in motor claims. I think it is a London-wide issue.
I think so. The one is the number of vehicles we insure, but it's the thing in contractor coming in-house in housing being back as well. So I think the increase in what we're insuring.
It's probably worth adding after the TMO activities were brought into the council, we effectively inherited a multi-drop fleet, and that's obviously part of the historic pressure on those. But as Sarah has alluded to, comparison to some of our neighbouring boroughs, there is an increase. It's not as dramatic as others. I might say from an insurance perspective, please don't install loads of traffic calming measures in the borough because your repairs drivers will hit them.
Are you consistent with 22-23 generously? I could say would be a return to pre-COVID norms. And if we were inheriting a fleet from the TMO, it would have been earlier than that.
Yes.
But the last 12 months, or that's in these figures, I don't know what this year's looking like, but the last 12 months, quite dramatic on the charts. It's interesting if that's a London-wide trend.
I think we've also worked more closely with other our colleagues across the council, and we're probably seeing more reporting into our service, which is good. But it does mean obviously that it increases the figures, and previously they may have been driving around, say with a dent in the bumper, for example, and now actually it's being reported to us properly.
Okay, all right. Well, there's lots of potential factors there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just wanted to return to the point about the impact of, let's say, hypothetically, an adverse event within our borough, the impact of that on the market in London, yeah, but also nationally. Do you think that the increased leaseholder premiums are also a function of the assessment of risk for council-owned buildings?
No.
Or is it just to do with reduction in competition?
No, I think the increase in leasehold premiums, given the way that market tends to work, the Grenfell tragedy obviously occurred quite a number of years ago in terms of the claims experience. So it's not something that is a particular feature. There was a small number of leaseholders that would have been involved in that process in terms of property claims. But what really has been driving the increase in leasehold premiums, at least from an insurer's perspective, is the increase in water damage based claims. And I should say for the record that I can't justify the current levels of premiums that are being charged. I certainly don't support the insurer's calculations. This is the first sort of period over the last couple of years where, I've been sitting in a room with leaseholders and I can't possibly explain to them that what they're being charged is right. It is just that is what they're being charged. Normally underwriters work to something like a sort of 60 to 70% loss ratio add-on expenses. Yeah, even you could kind of almost work back what a fair premium's likely to be. But the insurers will say that attritional losses to do with water damage leaks across the whole leasehold stock in the country, combined with the increase in global reinsurance premiums, and I don't wish to sound like an insurer because they do love to sort of put out those kind of terms whenever there's an increase, but it is inevitable that events such as what happened in Los Angeles have an impact on global insurance premiums. We are ever more these days in a one marketplace, not a number of regional markets.
Yeah, of course. So last time that I was at the homeowners panel where insurance came up, it was clear that a large proportion of the increases in the premium was to do with water damage. And it was also clear that, from what we were presented with, that the council has got better at addressing leaks and water damage. Would you say that that is the case, or has that somehow got worse?
I'm not sure I can answer for housing in general. I would obviously only see insurance claims which are not managed on the team, they're managed by an insurer.
Yeah.
But there certainly was, in the year before last, we were able to insure the leasehold with a significant deductible. This wasn't possible because the insurers didn't offer us a cap. And we made a calculation as to what we expected to spend. And although that period of claims is not closed off, that calculation is going to prove to be correct and maybe even a little bit less than we anticipated, which is some evidence that the work that sort of Doug and his team are doing is having an impact in that.
And it could be that we're having more claims as well because of that work.
Yes, there is, I suppose, there was a slight uplift in claims from the insurer's perspective. COVID was excellent in reducing things like water leaks because everyone was at home. Therefore, you didn't come home from work to find that something had been leaking for a while. But I do think overall that RBKC has been working very hard to control over that. Inevitably, unfortunately, inflation has an impact upon the cost of building repairs, and that's been counterbalancing. So I suspect the truth is somewhat that incidents may have at least remained the same or possibly come down, but actually the cost of those incidents has gone up.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Gary?
Thank you. Most of my sort of area of the questions has been answered very well. I would suppose I'd just like to add to what Councillor Simmons is concerns about the home insurance water damage is also connected to flood insurance. I know there are lots of people who can't actually get our services now in my ward in particular, essentially because on paper they have a lot of money that's tied up in the property they can't insure because of the floods in 2021. I don't have a particularly well formulated question around that. I just want to note that, and if you do have anything to say, obviously then say it. But I just really want to note that connection and the effect, and obviously the effect that Thames Water is having on that, because that's it's a massive problem. And that's all. I'll leave it.
No, thank you for that question. In particular will become sort of clear in a minute, but in terms of the claims data, I did say to the recent leasehold panel, probably once I've got these insurance renewals out of the way, I would try to do quite a detailed piece of analysis for them about losses generally, that they obviously constantly want assurance and comparison between leasehold losses and general council housing losses. I said I would try and put together some quite detailed information on that. But I did have a note written here that we've been talking with our colleagues in the sort of climate change sort of teams, and it's early days with some work that we can give them on data. But I do think in terms of sort of future risk scoping, which was part of this sort of brief, that is one of those areas that if it can be got right, the councils that get it right in 25, 50 years time will be spending a lot less money on insurance. You know, it's such an easy thing to say, but if we all had a time machine and we go back 100 years, we'd probably have very different design roads than we've got at the moment. And that's going to be one of those factors that will make a huge difference, I think, to long-term council finances, how we can manage those kind of climate-based risks. It is, I think, noticeable that it was perhaps a couple of years back, but one of the councils was the first time in the annual audit reviews where the auditors come and speak to the insurance side of it, that I got asked questions about climate. It's becoming a very significant price driver.
Excellent. And just to keep it, obviously mindful of keeping it within the agenda item. I'm thinking about the possible impact if it is, as I suspect, going to come out that essentially, well, I know where the responsibilities lie in terms of waterways, but like there's just massive negligence and massive infrastructure failures and possible culpability by has affecting people's ability to ensure that. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Just one question, Pete. I noticed you talked about the lack of benchmarking, and I just wondered why everybody had withdrawn from this, or so many people had withdrawn from the sector thing. I can see you're making valiant efforts to re-establish some kind of benchmarking, because obviously that's really helpful for us in terms of the market and so on. But
I think there were two factors. The Insurance London Consortium, which was a group of a number of boroughs that got together to buy insurance, were trying to do their own things, so they no longer contributed to it. But
did that fall apart, or is it still existing?
I think there are less members in it than there used to be. There were legal challenges around the procurement processes, and the authority I worked at the time was part of that process, so it had its benefits and pitfalls. But that they didn't want to contribute to the SIPFA exercise. So the less boroughs you've got in it, the data becomes almost pointless.
Yeah.
But equally, and this recent presentation I gave at the Alarm event where we're trying to get this up and running, it took a day per borough to fill in all of the information and get all of the data together. And it measured things that people perhaps really didn't want. And the more complicated it became, and it's true across all services, everybody seems to have less time than they've ever had before. So people just stopped submitting the data because nobody had that kind of time to give up. What we've tried to do with this new process is put something together that can be done in a shorter time period. And in fact, what I think we're hoping the outcome will be is that bits of the data can be done on an annual basis. So you might do highways one year, tree routes the next, just to make it a more manageable process. Because again, in insurance, year-on-year data is not that important. We want long-term trends.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to draw that to a close. I think it's been very reassuring to see how our insurance is managed. I don't think we've got any particular recommendations from this, but I think probably we'd like to see a very etiolated version of this on an annual basis or something. But because what you've given us here is amazing amount of very, very interesting detail about how we handle complaints, which has allowed us to reassure ourselves that we're fair. But I think in the long term, we probably need just a more figures-based report. But we can discuss that outside this meeting and come up with something. But I think we all say thank you very much for coming in and giving such a good presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And we'll now turn to examining our own people and look at the full kind of key decisions, which I will, as usual. We've got the report resolution items from I should really so that exactly it's right. Pulling through the key decisions, page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
On page 3, for instance, I mean page 5, sorry. We got to page 5.
We are. Yes, just.
I'm seeing something with a due date of December 24. I've highlighted that because I think it made of interest to Portia on the health, because I know that is something that she's raised in various avenues. And I just wondered, is that out of date now, or is that something that
I've just actually got information on that. It's awaiting implementation, and the due date has now been changed to the 15th of July.
Great, thank you very much.
I want number 5, the one directly under it, care and strategy. Yeah.
Yes.
Is that
what's the question? What's the point? I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, good.
I'm sorry. The battle is just on the train stop. Yes, I don't know. I don't see anything. I want to know about.
So this has been scrutinised at ASC, hasn't it?
Apparently so.
It's due to be implemented.
Yeah, more information on that.
Did you want more information on?
If you, I'm just all I saw was it was scrutinised, and yeah.
6.
Mary,
Oh, yep.
do you want to say they can leave if they'd like to?
I'm assuming that they knew that.
Yeah,
I thought they were just fascinating. I did think it was a bit odd, but I was so according to Kate. You're absolutely right.
You're welcome to stay, but we.
Yeah.
But clearly they're not fascinating. I find that very worrying.
I think once they
Thank
got
you
to
all.
Kate-
Sorry, I'm just doing it. I thought you would just know to make an exit. Thank you very much, Anna. That was very thoughtful. Right. Good night. 6, 7, 8
I'd like to ask
Yeah.
a question.
on page
8.
8.
If I'm right in the outcome of the GPF, is that at OSC or at HSC, do you think? Potentially. Or not?
That's sort of the OSC.
The communities and community safety. That's the lead member.
Check.
We'll find out.
It's also in both levels, so it might
So
be.
would you like to see that one at your?
I'd like to see it somewhere, I don't mind where.
Consultation or did the, sorry, previous rounds, has that come to here? Because I don't
I
remember
don't
it in
know.
housing.
I can't remember.
I remember doing it, but I couldn't tell you
Yeah.
which committee I did.
So
I
useful
can
that
say the
that's-
reason why I think it should come, because there are concerns among some applicants.
Okay. It will also be a question of, which committee can fit it in.
Yeah.
In a timely
To the
fashion.
agenda, exactly.
9.
3.
10. 11. 12. 13.
So is the approval of the contract, is that the due date's February last year?
This is that medium to high
This is a
housing
medium to
service.
high housing service, the vulnerable, yes, that's the one. And against the,
Yes, I have, yes.
So Yusuf's got an update?
Yes, it's not been published. And it's apparently not on the website, so we're trying to find out what the status of that is. Okay.
Okay, so the status is being investigated and we'll come back to you. So 13, 14?
Yes, please.
Yep.
The award of contract for asbestos management and non-domestic premises seems a very important job that be done, and it was timetabled for July 24th and doesn't
So
seem to
you're
have
not
been
on that one.
No, we're still trying to chase that up, because that's not been, there's no information on it, and there's no officer allocated.
So good point, and
I mean, what I
they're
do-
on it already.
What I do know is that in schools, there has been an implementation of that. And
So
training
yeah.
has taken place, so it may well have happened already.
But just stuck on this list.
Yeah.
So hence the investigation. 14, 15.
So on 15,
Yes.
you've got the decants policy. When I was looking through this, there seems to be a lot of strategies currently out for consultation. And I did wonder whether actually each OSC should have a list of consultations that are either live or due to be live in the next 6 months, just so that you're aware, because suddenly I looked at this and went, oh, there's a massive.
Could this be added
Yeah.
in?
That's a very good point. Should we think about that as something that we build into agendas or?
Alternatively, because you have 9 meetings a year, it may be that actually this is where you, as
We just have a list
down
of
another column.
We
We
don't,
have a
I
list
don't
of
think it needs
ones.
another column, but you could put it in the right-hand column here as a comment.
But I think it'd be nice to have it on one sheet of paper, a list of all the
Okay.
live consultations, yeah. So I think that's a good idea. So that was 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29,
Sorry, back to 25.
25.
Yeah, the refurbishment works Lancaster West Estate. There's lots of work going on there. Again, I'm surprised that that hasn't been, unless I'm,
It's kind of 2 decision points
Yeah.
within the contracts.
so how does this relate? Because there's a series of actions in Lancaster West. How does this relate? Is this to do with future actions or just hasn't been reported in terms of decisions that have already been made or what?
Is it worth looking at the key decision itself?
Yeah.
And then
I think we need to know what the decision points are.
Yeah.
it should say in the report, is the report been published?
But it would be good if we had it in
So you-
in the table.
Yeah.
And they say, we all
But
know
it's
it's a
more-
decision, because that's
more
why it's
detail.
there. So telling us it's a
Can I also
decision.
add to the one under it, the Homefield House, because that's where I live.
Thank you. So we've got to 29. I'm not going back to 26. 30. 31. 32. 33. 34. 35. 36.
Can I just say, Sharon, on 34, if we are looking at dates,
Which I as well.
that's, that's September the 2024. So I was just wondering, it's just why we've got things that still out there.
Sort of services consistently.
But yes, they said that it has been implemented.
But it
But
needs to come off.
yes, but they said it's been implemented, but they've not provided us with any papers. Yes.
Right. Okay, so this is another one where we're pursuing it and we need evidence to take it off the list.
And also just to go back to says I was pointing about the procurement strategy. Sorry, Council, somebody's pointing about the procurement strategy at Lancaster West Estate. Actually, there was an update. Sorry, it was the procurement strategy is awaiting implementation, and they are supposed to be emailing us about the contract award.
Mm.
So that's an update on that.
Okay. 30, I think I've done that, right? 36 and 37. Good.
Mary, can I make a general comment rather than trying to pick up one individual ones? There seems to be quite a lot in there. Well, we all know that things are actually happening on the ground.
I know, and I know that Jackie and Yusuf are struggling to get a handle on, and that's why we've got a long list of updates.
Could we sort of make a recommendation type comment through our officers who are working very hard on this? Who I don't know what the right place. I mean, Maxine, since you're here, Maxine, since you're here, maybe we can find through
Yes,
the right place.
and I've just instituted my own kind of call over of this kind of thing. And actually, this is something that I want to look at because it just needs to be done with pages and pages of stuff and things have actually been. 37 should have come off. So we need to close that loop. So, I mean, I think put it in the minutes of this meeting because that would be helpful. But I will take it away as an action.
We say we recommend, we welcome your.
Yeah, I mean, it's
doing
something
a
we've been struggling with for a year.
Shorter list
really,
because
really.
things have been caught up with.
So no doubt when Maxine intervenes, it will all happen. Thank you.
It will.
That's
Right.
right.
We know.
Annual scrutiny work programme.
Yeah.
Comments on that? Yes.
I was just saying one thing, which is coming from the Audit and Transparency Committee the other year, where they had sort of brought some audit reports on eventful spending, and where it was agreed and understood that power of audit and what audit actually does was not necessarily the correct tool, the answering the questions and concerns that residents had. And that therefore its correct place would be scrutiny and in particular OSC.
I will have to talk to Gerard about that. And so have they got
I did mention it in the AGM speech last year, and I have mentioned it to the committees.
I assume he's reminding. I'm sorry. I think Gerard thinks that they belong where they are, but
no, he doesn't.
He doesn't. He hasn't said that to me. He spoke to me. I spoke to him about something else.
Well, this was a meeting. The last report of it was in
So are
2023.
these regular reports that they're getting?
No. So they had one, and it wasn't answering what needed to be answered. So they have gone through 4 iterations of that process, which is, I think, come to the end of what can reasonably be done within that framework. And the last one was in 2023, and at that meeting, that was when it was agreed that the sorts of questions that prompted all these reports in the first place were more properly appropriate for scrutiny rather than audit. And we have been discussing this week and previously in our workshops with audit about the relationship between audit and scrutiny. And it's not radical or far-fetched to suppose that topics may come in either direction between scrutiny and audit. So that's something which was agreed. That was something which was agreed in 2023, and I have kept mentioning it. And previously, when I've mentioned it, I've been told, "Oh, yes, that's happening," but I don't see it happening. It may be that you don't feel it's a thing that you'd like to do.
Well, I think audit reports do belong in audit, but
perhaps I'm not making clear what I'm talking about, because I'm not talking about an audit report.
Right, and maybe I should have a look, discuss it with Jackie, and then discuss it with you offline, but make sure that I do discuss it with you before this meeting.
Can I say from my memory as well that there was understood to be some common element around risk between two, because the risk that we talk about is failures of services, and that sort of thing. The risk that auditors tend to talk about is financial and the governance of risk.
I have raised the issue of risk with Maxine in the last couple of weeks.
Risk management in terms of not providing the right services for the future demand and the capacity we have to do that is something that.
So Gerard raised this with me. I just raised it with Maxine. And we have yet to come to a resolution on
about looking at risks and how that's done. So yes,
whether we're doing it properly, what other councils do.
Gerard has proposed, I think, that the kind of enormity of the task of trying to really drill into the risks through audit transparency, which is where it does say. David Hughes, who was here earlier, is the director of audit and risk across Triborough, and he was going to have a look at it and come up with some suggestions about, and in particular, I think how you would like the role of individual scrutiny committees to work in relation.
Yes, whether we should actually take some of the level of detail down, because particularly stuff like mitigation measures and all the rest of it, down to the individual committees or not. So that is a work in process. So it's on my radar of something that.
I mean, when I chaired audit transparency department, Gerard, we did have at least one joint workshop. It's good. Scrutiny and audit, and it kept away from the specialities of each area, but it looked at whether there was an overlap.
There might be an argument for also looking at the particularities within service groups.
Yeah.
And if it satisfy themselves on that at that level. But again, I'm interested in what other councils do and what is considered sort of good practice before we start reinventing the wheel. So I did. I
was going to make almost exactly the same point, and having chaired the committee which set up the structure of scrutiny, I think we had a long discussion about risk, and there was always an expectation this committee would have a joint meeting every year with the audit and transparency to do risk, and it's never it's happened once. I know it's happened once. I don't think it's happened more than once in the last however many years, 6 years or so since this model has been in operation.
So that's one aspect of it, the sort of corporate level risk, and then there is the service level risk, if I can make that distinction with any sense, and whether, so there are two issues there. One, should we be having those joint meetings? Obviously, we think we should, and so implementing them, and then talking at the scrutiny committee level.
Certainly at audit on Monday, we did also, Gerard raised it, and the risk register that Maxine has brought in is much lighter touch in terms of it's tighter and it's heavier hitting. But as a result, we did query whether actually at a directorate level there was another set of risk registers that was in each scrutiny committee level, and actually we did feel that ought to go to specific scrutiny committees, but we recognise that you and Gerard were going away with it, with officers to come back on it.
Yes, we were hoping they were going to come up with a cunning plan we could then adopt. So yes, that is on the radar, and I think it's a very good challenge. obviously, because at individual committee level, you've got a much better grasp of the reality of the risks and what ought to be done mitigation. Good. So I'm taking Claire's point away. I'm not forgetting about it or brushing it onto the carpet. And we've discussed risk. Is there anything else in this paper that we need to comment on or have any thoughts on? Good. Which place, in the absence of any urgent business, we'll move to come in. Thank you. So thank you very much. Really make
Yes.
Yes.